Greetings, everyone. I hope you had an okay weekend. You were safe and warm. Today is Monday, February 15th, and here is today's Monday Morning Minute. For today, we'll look back at last week's critical responses based on the Finn chapter discussing Annion's research. Then we'll talk about this week's reading, which is the NCTE statement entitled Definition of Literacy in a Digital Age. And then finally, we'll talk about critical response number 2 coming up this week. So last week we read the piece from Literacy with an Attitude. It was chapter 2, A Distinctly Un-American Idea, and I had tacked on the preface to the entire book ahead of that chapter as well. So we had a lot of really interesting concepts to work with, right? All of the different designations that Annion put forward, as well as the themes within each of those school types. We also had Finn's notion of domesticating literacy and education versus an empowering literacy or empowering education. So a lot for us to think on. And I just pulled out a couple of big ideas that I saw across the small groups. And those small groups, by the way, they were just really, I was so impressed by your writing, by your engagement with the ideas. So this little GIF in the top right corner of the screen, this is Sherlock, brilliant. It's for all of you. I was it was just so much fun to be able to read through and learn your ideas, to challenge my own thinking at the same time. It was fabulous. So please, more of this with our critical responses. Okay, so one big idea that I wanted to bring up to your attention was one that Lindsay brought up, and I'm so thankful. So here, what she's doing is connecting what we saw in the Finn text to Scribner, right? So when Finn says that he's envisioning this empowering literacy or this empowering education, we can think back to Scribner's work, right? Of those metaphors of literacy. One of them, as you might recall, was literacy as power. So as Scribner points out, and as Lindsay writes here, there is a limitation to that, right? In this case, thinking about if we, empowering education, will it be the same thing for everybody? Will it look different? The fear is that uniformity may not serve everybody equally, right? So it's something to think about. And please do continue to weave the threads from multiple resources together. That's, I think, where learning can be particularly rich for us. And then secondly, thinking about domesticating education versus empowering education, Stacy described for her an aha moment in which she's drawing on Finn, who explains that domesticating education leads to functional literacy, literacy that makes a person productive and dependable, but not troublesome. So Stacy asks, were we, the students, getting ushered through the high school experience just to move us on to the next thing? Great question. And then Caitlin followed up and restated Stacy's question as follows. What are our students being groomed for? Wow, this is a huge question, and the implications are myriad. Paul and Tom were in the drop-in hours on Tuesday, and we talked at length about this question. And so I just wanted to name it. I don't have any great answers for you, but I do want us to think about it and think about the ethical implications of sort of socially reproducing the economic backgrounds of our students versus disrupting that. And if we're disrupting that, to what end are we disrupting that, right? Thinking about those 4 different types of schooling that Annion describes, do we want all of our kids to have access to an executive elite education? Or what about that affluent education and the pedagogical and curricular styles of that? Is there kind of one model that we think would be that most of our students would be well served by? And if so, what is it? There are a lot of things to think about, but I do love this question. What are our students being groomed for? And I want us to carry that forward always when we're thinking about literacy and our content areas, because of course these two are so closely linked. So this week, again, we're still in this zone where we're thinking about the definition of literacy, and I hope, it is my fervent desire that by the end of this unit, at least, your thinking about literacy coming in has been changed in some small way based on all of the readings that we've done so far. So the last piece I'm asking you to read, or maybe it's the second to last. No, I think it's the last. I'll have to check that. But any one of the last pieces that we're reading within this What is Literacy unit is actually a statement position by the National Council of Teachers of English. If you haven't tracked down your content area's professional organization, I would highly recommend you do so. You can even do some poking around and see what they say about literacy, because it's very likely they have a statement about literacy. The reason I'm asking you to read this NCTE, the National Councils for Teachers of English statement, is because I think it is actually quite applicable across content areas. It's, I think, 8 or 9 pages long, somewhere in there, and just there are a lot of excellent questions that they're posing. They're not giving, easy answers about what literacy in a digital age needs to look like in our classrooms, but they're providing a lot of really interesting questions and food for thought. So they talk about literacy, for instance, as a collection of communicative and socio-cultural practices shared among communities. They look at literacy's plural as interconnected, dynamic, malleable. And they have various areas within the document that you all will be reading, kind of these high impact practices that they want to see specifically in language arts. But again, I'm making the argument here that we can actually use them across content areas. And one of those ideas that I thought was particularly interesting was this idea that 21st century students need to move from just consuming content to curating content to then creating content to put out into the world. And I thought that that was such an interesting shift. Again, we can see this very much in line with ideas of literacy as power or even literacy as state of grace. So again, keep Scribner, keep Finn in mind. And the big question I want you to think about, to wrestle with, to chew on as you look through the statement piece is, how might these ideas relate to my content area? If you're not English, I think it's very easy to be like, well, that doesn't really apply to math. That doesn't really apply to science, etc. That's not a super interesting intellectual exercise, right? Instead, ask yourself how it does relate. What are the places where you see some overlap or some potential overlap between the ideas presented in this piece and your own content area? This goes back very much to, the question or the concepts that Finn posed in the preface, right? Domesticating literacy versus empowering literacy. So think about that as you move into this week's prompt, which is describing for us your vision of a content area course in which several of the elements discussed in the position paper are present. So as you're reading through that NCTE article, you might highlight or annotate a couple things that you think, oh yeah, I could actually do something like this in social studies or, in art or PE or what have you. And so when you're communicating your vision of this content area course that includes those digital literacies described in the paper, I want you to think about how you want to present that vision to us. It could totally be just a typical 300 to 400 word response within the, you just type it out into Canvas as you did last week. You could also, in that same discussion forum, perhaps share a narrative with an image that maybe captures what you're thinking of when you look at the vision of 21st century digital literacies in your content area. You could also create a quick little voice thread or a narrated PowerPoint slide that communicates that vision for us. So I hope that this is clear. Basically, you're trying to take the ideas in the NCTE piece and visualize them actually happening in your content area classroom and sharing that vision with us. I am asking you to reference the article specifically. And again, please feel free to include ideas and concepts from previous articles as well. The Finn seems particularly relevant, perhaps the Scribner piece as well. And so for critical response number 2, again, that's within the discussion forum on Canvas. And I'm asking for your initial post by the 18th on Thursday, and then 2 follow-ups on Sunday, the 21st. So if any of this was confusing, of course, you can let me know. Please remember that we will have drop-in hours on Tuesday, then the 16th, That's what it is, according to my wall calendar. And that will be at 5:45 p.m. Please feel free to pop in. If you have a question, great. If you just want to chat about the readings, also cool. I'm here. So I hope you all are safe and well, and I hope that we get some nicer weather this week. Take good care, everyone.